All right. Well, Melanie Finn, who wrote the Hare, welcome to our bookshelf. For someone who hasn't read the book, how would you summarize the Hare for a reader who was interested?
I would describe it as a dark noir feminist thriller about a woman who might be labeled a victim, who through her circumstances has been victimized, but through the course of the book finds a sort of charts a strange course of empowerment for herself.
Yep.
And I would warn readers, it's a dark read, but I hope that the feeling is very positive at the end.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I felt like yeah, I was really inspired by her journey and the book. Do you know what I mean? So I felt like as much as there was a lot of dark things that she went through, there was always this resilience that was so uplifting in the storytelling. It sounds like that was very intentional.
I think the resilience is a curious quality that Rosie, the main character, has, and I wonder why some of us seem to have more of it than others. I'm very curious about the source of that resilience because many people go through exactly what Rosie went through, which was emotional and sexual abuse as a child, and then of course, immediately making poor decisions about her romantic life that has devastating consequences for her. So there's many people who have that same experience, but they don't seem to have that quality of resilience. And I'm curious about that. Do you have any
Yeah.
feelings about that, Jen?
You
Like
know,
where
I
that
don't
comes from?
know. I mean, it's interesting you bring it up just because, as an actor, I've had to face some of those questions at times when you play characters that have had backstories with some of the things that Rosie's been through. Um, and I don't know. What I found about Rosie in the book is that there was this, at least from my perspective as I was reading it, I felt like because she didn't know any different,
Mhm.
she didn't have something to compare it to feel like what was going on with her was as dark and overwhelming as it really was because she didn't have the thing to compare it to, which was also kind of what kept her where she was because she didn't know what to aspire how to sort of reach to this other place that maybe she could reach to. But it also is sort of what kept her alive and resilient because she wasn't resentful. She was just, she only knew what she knew. Does that make sense?
No, it totally does, and I'm really pleased that you saw that about her. I think most kids who have unhappy childhoods don't have that reference point.
Yeah.
Um, so I was talking with a friend the other day whose father was a very violent alcoholic, and it's
Mm.
like it just feels like it's normal, and then at some point you realize it's not. But as you point out, I don't think Rosie ever comes to that point where she realizes that what she suffered was extraordinary, unique, or even wrong. But she seems to find herself. Well, she doesn't seem to. I know she does because I read
Yes.
the
You have the inside track on this one,
I have got
Melanie.
the inside track. So she finds herself uh, in the natural world by becoming physically strong and engaging with the woods and the mountains around her. She finds herself in that place, and I felt that actually was something that happened to me. Having yes had an unhappy childhood and made lots of poor decisions about men, and but then finding really how I understood myself and my strength from being in the natural world. And I love that
Wow.
Rosie manages to do that.
Wow, that's incredible. Was it a self imposed time in the wilderness, or was it like a retreat, or how were you able to have that experience?
When I lived in LA, I was, a young woman in LA, and I'm sure you probably know what that's
It's
about.
tricky.
It's tricky and it has its own sort of madness. And I rented a trailer out in the Mojave out near
Wow.
Joshua Tree. And at that time in the 90s, it was still like an undiscovered area. And I started just hiking a lot in that really rugged terrain. And something entered me. It was just
Mm.
an idea I wanted better for myself. And I was really able to hold on to that through, another decade of, being quite mixed up. I didn't really start writing seriously till I was nearly 40.
No
So
way.
yeah, well, I had written in LA. I had written scripts and stuff. But I don't think I didn't take myself seriously until 40. Yeah.
Wow. Isn't it interesting that and maybe, well, maybe this is unique to me, but I feel like there might be something universal in it, which is like it's so easy when you're searching for that stuff to be frustrated that other people aren't taking you seriously. But no one can take you seriously until you take yourself seriously.
That's true. And I was very lucky that actually when I worked in LA, there was a series called The Red Shoe Diaries, which is sort of notorious now. It was led by David Duchovny, and it was kind of like this erotica thing that was on Showtime, with Salman King was the showrunner for that. And what was extraordinary about that experience was that we were writing about sex. It was very nice, like loving sex, sexy sex, not like
Sure. Yeah.
but it was, and it was in Canoga Park, which is weirdly where they make all kinds of like sex films. But it was like this family-run organization. There was Zalman and his two daughters, and there was me, and it was this sort of family-run enterprise. And Zalman was the first person who had ever taken my writing seriously, and
Mm,
he always pushed me with these scripts to dig for character, to improve my dialogue, to do all of these, to become a writer. He was the
yeah.
first person who had faith in me. And I would say for every young woman, you have to have that one person who's like, I completely see what you're capable of and I support you. And as you going back to Rosie, that is actually what she doesn't have,
Mm.
except her neighbor Billy, I think,
Yeah,
sees.
and Billy, what a character. I mean, what I was just I'm curious. I have so many questions, so I'm trying to get them in the right order. But it's like when you set out to write this, was it Rosie was the character that sort of emerged first for you, or was it the sort of thematic ideas that you were exploring? Because as you said, it's sort of this feminist thriller, um, but the character is so rich that I just found myself as a reader wondering kind of which came first. Was like thematically, were you intrigued by this world, or was she just so rich that she kind of gave you this world?
That's always a chicken and egg question for writers. I think for me, I generally start with a question, a
Mm,
theme that is generally pretty self-based, pretty narcissistic. And that was, if you have been abused, what what shadow does that abuse cast over all the decisions that you make in your life? And at what point do you find yourself free of that
mm,
shadow? So that was the starting point. And Rosie sort of emerged pretty quickly out of that. Every writer is writing about a version of themselves without writing about themselves. It's like an
sure.
alternate universe. And I think we all tend to start that character at a familiar place, but then very quickly that character becomes
Mhm.
their own person. And so, Rosie kind of started at this place, a kid who'd had a emotionally, drought ridden emotional childhood, and had these awful, this abuse happen. Um,
Yeah,
and, but, like I did not grow up in Lowell, Massachusetts. I did not grow up with my
sure, sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, and so then that gets layered onto it. But certainly I would say probably the truest part of the book is the insecurity of her being 18 and finding herself in the world
Mm,
completely unprepared for the decisions that she has to make about her life and how to read people and what they want and what they're offering. I think that's pretty universal, regardless of, you know, what experience you've had. You stand on that threshold at 18 and you just have no idea what to do or how to move forward
yep.
effectively.
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting because I was a very lucky child. I did not have abuse in my childhood. Um, and yet I did find myself very much relating to Rosie in that place in her life, because no matter how your upbringing is or how supported you are, you still kind of reach that point where you get kicked out of the nest and you're looking at the world going like, I don't know if I know how to be a person. Like where do I start? How do I actually be a person? And we have school gives you all this structure where you have to do things at certain times and all this stuff, and then all of a sudden you get out of school and there's no structure and there's no plan for how to get a job, or it's like everything is just so much trial and error and figuring out even how to eat right or rent an apartment, or, all these things. It's like we don't sort of set people up in the education program to come out on the other side knowing how to do any of the things that are going to keep you alive.
I think there's another element to that too, which is something I didn't directly address when I was 18 because I didn't even think of it as a question, but that is how to be a woman in the world, and
Mm,
what that means, and how, are you a sex object? Are you like like there's all these questions, and I see my daughters who are just turned 13 kind
mm,
of embarking on that journey of how do they see themselves in this world? How do they want to embrace that identity of womanhood, whatever it is, whether they're, cis or whatever they're going to turn out to be? I've got no idea, because
of
that journey is
course.
starting.
Yeah.
And it's sort of exciting as a mother to see that, and hope that I might be a little bit more of an advice board for them. But I still think it's a solitary journey. Um,
Yeah.
one of the things I've guess I've most been upset about, being leveled at Rosie, is that, oh, she's such a victim. And
Mm,
I feel, well, don't we get to write about victims? Why should every woman that we write about be this powerhouse? I know what to do. I'm solving this murder mystery. I think we have to allow people to get it wrong and
yeah. To be
muddle their way
human. They have to
through.
be humans.
Yeah.
Like not every human, when they're put in a bad situation, knows what to do. Most of us don't, like I love hearing that. Yeah.
I would say, where would we be in fiction if we didn't have, muddled heroines, from Madame Bovary onwards? People are just trying to figure stuff out. And I think that's an important thing about a book, is that it can be an avatar for you to experience your own confusion or reflect on times in your life when maybe you didn't make the best decisions. If we don't allow books to be messy and have messy characters, I'm not sure. Like, is the alternative just like Netflix
I
thriller
don't know.
instead?
I 100% agree with you. And I feel like it's interesting that not many people are talking about that. It's something that, I mean, just, in the industry side of it too, it comes up all the time. And,
Mm.
everyone says like, well, you play so many strong women. I said, well, no, I like to play really whole women, and whole women have moments where they're really strong, but they also have moments where they're really vulnerable or broken. That's just part of being that's actually not a gendered thing. Like, it's actually just what happens as a human, like you can be really strong one day and a mess the next day. That's just how it goes, and I feel like it's such a weird disservice to audiences to act as if um that women just have to be entirely strong all the time, because then that's going to make an audience member feel like they're failing every time they don't feel strong, like you have to see all the messy grit to go, oh right, we all go through this stuff and I'm not alone in this, and there is a way to work through this. And fiction is a great way to have options, to start considering the ways that you could work through those things.
I think that's absolutely right. I One of the problems I have with a lot of fiction, and whether it's on books or TV, is that women are allowed to be either strong or crazy, right? We have the unreliable narrator, which is hugely popular. And
Yeah.
I mean, I've enjoyed those books and those films just as much as
Right.
everybody else.
Yeah.
But I wonder, well, where is the and then there's the sort of the young messy woman, right? That's sort of become a trope too. But it's a sort of, where is the mess going? I think that when a character realizes her mess and that she wants to make it better, that's a massive pivotal point for any character to kind of go through that transformation. Is how do I reshape my own narrative? I think that is the power that great books give us, is taking the mess. That's what your resolution is. I've made this huge mess. How do I fix it?
Yeah. And I mean, the thing that's interesting is, like, when I was first started going to the therapist that I go to now, I for a very long time had a hard time identifying what I was feeling when I was feeling it. I felt a lot, and I could tell you exactly what my characters were feeling, but I had a hard time getting to the identification of what I was feeling. And so I would say to her, she's like, "Well, how do you feel about whatever?" And I'd be like, "Can you just give me multiple choice?" Because like I just like when anything is possible, I'm not sure how to identify it.
Mm.
And it was so sweet because she did. She was like, "Sure, I'll give you multiple choice." And she would give me like 4 or 5 options. And then when I heard it, I knew it was the truth. And I'd go, "Oh, see, yeah, that's the feeling that I'm feeling." And I don't need that anymore, but it's interesting that, like when you have books to look at, when you have, and I'm sure this is why I was just like in love with reading from such a young age, is that because I couldn't quite kind of tangibly understand my own feelings, I could put myself in these stories and I could start to see these ways of like, oh, I would never thought of walking it out this way. I would never have thought of the pivot being this could be the solve to the mess that I accidentally made. And it's so cool that you're so committed to that in your writing. It's so clear in the Hare. It's so clear. Um and also just the journey of like the different phases of her life that you bring Rosie through. It's like you can feel how she shifts and changes through each different phase and how she kind of discovers a new part of herself, and that different people seem to activate different things in her as well, which I think is very rare to see that level of thoughtfulness in interactions in a novel, where I could feel that you were very aware that everyone made a different part of her kind of shine when they interacted with her. How do you plot something like that out, or is that an intuitive thing as you're writing?
I think, well, I have to I have to stop saying I think, because actually that's a joke that Rosie and Christiane have in the book, is that women always say I think. Well,
Yeah,
yeah, no, actually,
I know.
I know. A lot of that came from my script writing days in LA, where,
Mm,
as you know from a script, you cannot have a lot of exposition. Everything has to be shown or explicitly said. And every scene needs to move the story forward in some way. And bringing that into writing novels has been really useful to me, because it's sort of like, what is this scene saying and doing? And
mm.
what is this character seeing and doing? I mean, my publisher, a fantastic $2 radios,
I
them,
love them.
Eric Obanoff, the publisher, said, always it amazed me that you finished this much, you fit this much into a short space about this woman's life, but it never feels hurried.
Yeah,
And I would say that is something I'm good at, is actually
yeah.
writing in a very concise way, which comes from, yeah, from writing scripts. You don't have a lot of space to get your message across. It has to be really clear what's happening. Even if characters aren't talking to each other, you have to understand the tension and the non-verbal communication that's going on in
Mm.
if writing a script. And I mean, I didn't write anything great, just wrote Red Shoe Diaries, but it was a great foundation.
Yeah, that's so cool. You kind of, I feel like it usually goes the opposite way, where someone is saying that they've learned so much more about script writing because of being a novelist or writing fiction. And so it's really cool to hear that it was influenced in the opposite direction in this situation, in a way that was so powerful for the result. It's really amazing. I want to go back to Billy though. So
Okay.
where did Billy manifest? Because what a character. Like, I mean, she's so enigmatic and yet so clear. It was like I could completely see Billy and her home and the proximity to where Rosie was, and like them in the woods, and I could see her wardrobe. Like I just like how did she manifest for you?
I love Billy, and of course, there's a bit of a spoiler alert that Billy is a woman, but there's a reason for that, in that Billy had actually started out as a man
Mm,
when I first started writing, and Billy was based, again, going back to the Mojave. I had a friend called Gary, who was just an old desert rat, and his house was just a shambles. It was very much indoor outdoor. There was just cat shit under the bed. It was
mm,
really quite disgusting. But Gary just took me as I came, as a friend.
mm,
He never questioned the mess that I was in. He just sort of provided a place for me to start. And he had a bunch of horses, and we would go out riding for hours and hours in the desert. And it's when you have, as much as I had Zalman in LA telling me you can be a writer, you can be a writer, I also had Gary who just said, I embrace you as you are. I
mm,
ask nothing of you. And um, that was important too, I think, to have a friend who didn't want me to be anything in particular, as I was a good-looking young woman, didn't want that either. Just
Mm.
wanted to embrace me as myself. That was an extremely powerful experience. So Gary was the the template for Billy, and his kindness, and the sort of way he lived his life also, which was very rudimentary, without ambition, just didn't want to be anything other than who he was, making saddles in the desert, smoking Marlboros and riding his horses. Like that was the beginning and end for him. And
Wow.
I love that about Billy. Billy's independence is absolutely authentic. She
Mm.
doesn't want to play by society's rules, either because of her gender or her poverty. And I think that that is a self-sufficient ideal. I think it's unreachable for most of us, because most of us probably have more, I guess I would call it ambition, but we need more physical comfort and a certain
Mm.
unable to feed ourselves
Right.
as Billy does. But I loved, and I think I was also afraid that if Billy was a man, there would always be that possible sexual tension, or that Rosie would always suspect that Billy wanted something more.
Or even
Um,
that the audience would
yes, or
project
that
that as opposed to, yeah,
the
yeah.
reader would expect it. And so I wanted to be clear that that wasn't the case. And I also found, as I started writing, and my neighbor actually said that, I mean, incredibly right, that the book reminded him of Virginia Woolf's Orlando, which is sort of like,
Mm.
okay, I'll take that compliment.
You should, yeah, own that one.
So the book in a way sort of became this showcase of various ways of maybe being a woman in this world. And I think that Billy is one of those ways, is to just completely eschew femininity, or what society tells us is feminine.
There's
So
something so admirable about Billy's ability to be self-sufficient. Like in a way that to me was like that I felt envious of as a reader, as a female reader, because I felt like, you know, you're not there's so many things that I'm not even sure are like unknown biases that I have about being a woman, because you don't know, you're just raised how you're raised, and you keep trying to be more and more aware and kind of work it all out. But you're still raised as a little girl, and there's certain things that society kind of puts on you, or you don't realize these like agreements you've made with yourself of like what that means to be a little girl, and then a young woman, and then a woman in the world. And to read Billy, I was like, man, I had no concept as a young woman that that was even a possibility for a woman. Do you know what I mean? Like it was so far away from my awareness in the way that I was raised that it just never would have occurred to me. And it sounds so miraculous to think no matter where I am at any moment I could survive. I could feed myself, I could make a fire, I could figure out shelter, I could, it's there's something so I'm jealous of that in her. I was like, should I go to some like wilderness camp? Like, should I go and figure out how to like survive on the land? Because this sounds like what we all should know how to do.
what I love most about Billy is the way she's completely sidestepped this vanity or this self-consciousness that we have. And I think, you're an actor and you have to look a certain way, and you do
Mm.
look a certain way. I mean, you're beautiful. And that is that adds a level of complexity and expectation of how we enter this world. And I love that Billy has just said, I'm not having any part of that. Genuinely, like, she's
Yeah.
just not interested. It's not that she's damaged, or she's hideous, or she's just completely not interested in putting on that mask and playing that role. It doesn't matter to her. It's got nothing to do with her ability to survive or even be happy. And I love that liberation. I wish I could
Yeah.
have it for myself. And I kind of think, well, maybe when I'm 90, I'll just go out and I'll get sunburned and I'll get skin cancer and I'll smoke cigarettes and drink whiskey and I just won't care anymore.
Yeah. I know. I'm like, does it take to be like, do we just have to be little wrinkled old ladies before we don't care?
There are huge questions about how we interface with our faces in this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know, aging and, you know, menopause and, you know, going to that idea of menopause. I don't think I could have written this book um, and until I had gone through menopause,
Yeah.
because it gives you a completely different perspective on your younger self and the expectations that you had of your younger self.
Mm.
And also like a kind of a more bird's eye view of what society wants you to be as a woman, if that even makes sense. Like it's
It
society.
does. I mean, it's so hard to put words to it. I feel like it's this thing that I go around and around about with my girlfriends and, with other creatives, and it's like it's so strange because the people trying to dig themselves out of all the expectations have only known the world with those expectations placed on them. So how do you ever fully dig an entire gender out of that? Do you know what I mean? Because if you're constantly being fed what culture and society is feeding you, like how do you ever totally liberate yourself from it to be able to move past it or to grow past it or see the options of how to grow past it? And so it's this sort of kind of endless conversation about what that means. And I think that's also why Billy was interesting to me because when I look at all the things that are going on in the world right now, especially what's going on in Iran and how scary it is to see women suffering in the way that they are and imprisoned in a country in the way that they are from the societal expectations. Um, I look at them and I think I want them to all meet Billy. You know what I mean? Like I want, you know what I mean? Because you just think how do you start a movement of like encouraging women to be so self-sufficient that a man couldn't threaten their safety, and that's always what it's come back to, I think, historically for women is like, well, our bodies are smaller and we're not as strong, we don't have as many guns or whatever. I don't pretend to totally understand it, but it's like there's so many of us. Like there's just as many of us as there are men. Like how is it possible that it's gotten to this and for so long historically?
So I just have to point out, speaking of men, the banging in the background. I don't know if you can hear it, but it is my husband actually finishing a job that he started and promised me he would do. So
That's
while
good.
we're having our feminist talk, there is a man actually working and fulfilling a promise.
That's
So
good.
yeah, he gets the thumbs up today. And but that's what the bang is. Um, I do, I think this idea of why we still fight so much for basic rights and autonomy is endlessly confusing to me. And as you do, I'm looking back, going, well, why are we going backwards? And I wonder about how many women out there are actually in the boat paddling backwards. Um,
Mm,
Going back to that idea of the kind of tropes that women in fiction and film are often sort of shoveled into, the strong woman detective or the crazy past, the crazy mother. Um, that does seem to me like we're not able to embrace complexity and see that weakness may also be acceptable, but may also be a form of strength. And at the same time, we're like, and we could talk about this, and obviously it gets unpacked by people
yeah.
who are much more knowledgeable and have PhDs in this kind of gender
Yeah, of course. Yeah. But it's nice. I
thing.
mean, it's like I feel like normal people have to be able to have the conversation too, or we're not going to get anywhere. It's like if we wait for everyone with a PhD to solve it, we're we're not going to get anywhere.
I again, one of the things I loved about hitting menopause was just being able to say, I'm just really don't care about
Mm,
these societal constructs anymore, about being meek and mild or pretty or not offending people, or that I need to dress a certain way. Expectations become very different when you're a middle-aged woman.
mm,
People are both dismissive of you, and as Rosie finds, or Rose finds, you are invisible, and there's a certain power
mm,
that can come with that invisibility once you embrace that, particularly because you have spent so much of your life trying to be seen in a certain way. It's sort of like this secret power cloak that you can put on, and kind of uh, wandering between the cracks of things, I suppose. Rose certainly comes to middle age pretty dysfunctional in certain ways, pretty isolated.
Hmm.
But I think that that last part of the book is really for her to decide how she wants to live the rest of her life, and to make that decision that she's going to do it completely on her own terms. Um,
Yeah. It's such a beautiful, I don't know, the symbolism of taking the painting and it just, I don't know. It was all very, I had, it made me go back and reread from when she first saw the painting because I was aware that it was significant when it happened, but I was unaware of how significant it was going to be until I got to the end. And so it made
I'm
me want to re-experience all of that with that knowledge that it was headed there.
I'm not sure that I knew. I can't quite remember or how I came back to her like getting the painting. I knew that the painting was important. But I think that even as I put her in the car and propelled her off to Bennett's sister, I was unsure of what she was going to do. And
Mm.
there's one small thing that I nobody's picked up on, so I'm just going to mention it. But when she goes to see the painting, she buys a pair of pantyhose, to put on her head like a kind of a ski mask.
Yes.
And I had in my mind that this was like a piss take on the Playboy bunny ears, right?
Ah,
So, but nobody's picked up on that, and that's
right,
just
because it goes here and it's
yeah,
still coming off. And
yeah,
we have to make the movie so that people can see it and then they'll get it.
right. These like ridiculous floppy ears being the opposite of that ideal of pulchritude and availability that
Mm.
the bunny represented. So that
Oh,
was
I
like
love it. I
that was
love it.
my
Wow. Oh, that's so great. It's such a great image too. It's like, because what's interesting is I pictured that and I thought, oh gosh, how crazy that she's going through all this with her face smashed. But I wasn't thinking about the extension of, just the logistics of the pantyhose.
but also the whole idea of pantyhose. In like nobody wears pantyhose anymore, right? But like I grew
No.
up when people wore pantyhose, and it was always this like, why am I wearing these hot, itchy things like that are all bulgy and like what is the purpose? And I don't even know what was the point of pantyhose, to make you look like you had a tan, to hide the fact you hadn't shaved. I don't know. I mean, I can see wearing wool tights in winter because they
Yeah.
keep your legs warm,
Yeah.
but they no point to pantyhose. It's just one of these things that was foisted on women,
I
like
think it was like a way of
underwire bra.
force.
Here you go.
Yeah.
Put this on to make yourself uncomfortable and hot.
It's so true. I know. I mean, and it's like I think ultimately it goes back to like that women had to be covered, which is again
Mm.
what they're dealing with in Iran in a different way. But like, it was such a scandal to see a woman's ankles at one point, and then short skirts got shorter and shorter from there. But I wonder if it was this sort of workaround of, but my skin is covered.
Maybe I don't know. There's a book out there, a really fascinating book about somebody like Susan Orlean could write a great book about the
Yeah.
advent of those and why they came about. I think one of the things I did want to touch on, to get your feeling about, again, I mean, the book's been out for a while, and so I've heard
Yeah.
things that people liked and various things that people didn't like or found
Mm.
confusing. And one of the things that has come up is the character of Miranda, who's Rosie's daughter.
Mm.
And it seemed to be that mothers in particular were upset that Miranda wasn't a better daughter, and Miranda didn't seem to understand what her mother had done and done for her and given for her. And I wondered, how you felt about that.
I've really I found it really powerful because I found it more honest than how most mother-daughter relationships are represented. We tend to sort of aspirationalize these things in fiction, and all relationships are complicated, even when they're good between a parent and a child. And I actually, to me, it said how much of an incredible mother Rosie was to Miranda because Rosie protected Miranda from all of the things that could have made Rosie understand. Sorry, Miranda understand Rosie. Like if Rosie weren't as exceptional of a strength of a mother, um, she would have put her burdens on her child. she would have said, well, don't you know what your father did? And, don't you know what I've been through? And, you know, she would have been sort of bringing Miranda into her own damage in a way. And it seems as if Rosie took everything that she learned from being with Billy in the wilderness and everything that she learned to be able to be strong. And she gave her daughter a chance at having a life that was completely driven by agency, her own agency to make decisions and to be able to take care of herself, which meant she was privileged in her ability to take agency and in a way that Rosie never was. But it made them two completely alien beings to each other because of that, because their experiences were completely opposite. So there's no way Miranda could ever fully understand Rosie because Rosie protected her from her damage. And so, poor Miranda is just trying to understand her history, and she's going through her own version of what Rosie went through, but having had the privilege of being taught how to have agency in her life. And so to me, it made total sense. It was heartbreaking and it was painful, but it felt like a total honest portrait of what a child who had a mother who gave her what she gave her might be going through. And then it's also heartbreaking because it's just this proof of like, no, how matter how great of a parent you are, and no matter how much you sacrifice to give your child a good life, there's still going to be some journey that that child has to go through that is going to create separation at some point. They have to, like, it's why for whatever good and bad with all of it, like it's why every Disney movie kills a parent. It's like why every fairy tale kills a parent, because like the psychology behind it is, well, who are you without these people who are telling you who you are? And so there's always this like chasm that has to happen. And it's painful. It's terribly, terribly painful on both sides. Um, but it felt so true to me. It felt so absolutely true. And it also felt like a gift to Rosie, in my opinion, because it's part of what liberates her in the end, is that she realizes Miranda needs that space, and that in giving Miranda that gift of that space, she's also gaining that gift of, I get to go to fully discover who I truly am without any of these things that are binding me to a past or to my damage. So I mean, I thought it was really brave and really heartbreaking, but so moving.
Thank you so much, Jen, for exactly interpreting everything I meant
Oh,
in that
good.
relationship. Because it is sort of, I mean, obviously I have a complicated relationship with my mother, I think the way most of us do. And as I become a mother, now my girls are 13, I feel like
Yeah,
now I really am stepping into that role, apart from just, being a
keeping them
parent.
alive.
Yeah, I've kept them alive. Now it's like, wow. And that idea that I don't want them to have any looking back at me, right? They are, as that Cahill Gibran quote, right? You're the arrow, and you're the bow, and your children are the arrows. And
Mm,
I love that Miranda has become this kick-ass woman operating as a man in this man's world without any qualms about it. It doesn't occur to her that she should be, playing by anybody's rules other than her own. And I think that is a great gift, and it's exactly what Rosie wants for her. And Rosie, of course, she wants to be recognized as any of us do, but it's not a primary motive. She doesn't complain to her daughter like, you never visit and you never call. And she's accepting. And yes, that idea at the very end that, even maternal love is an obligation, and
mm,
freedom really ultimately is freedom from any obligation, even if those
yeah,
are about love.
yeah,
And all of us need to reach a point where we're ready to let go of love, I think. Yeah, just
yeah. Well, and it was also interesting just because it's like y- Rosie has a tremendous amount of agency in her own way. She just doesn't always make decisions that are going to help her get out of the situation she's in because she doesn't know how to make better decisions. So she does actively do a lot of things, but it isn't until all of those active things are up until the end are to just stay alive. And she's accepted that as enough. And for her to go and to steal the painting in the end, the symbolism of like, no, I'm going to go take something for my own, and I will deal with the repercussions, whatever they
It's
are.
it's not just
It's
take something, it's take something from the rich, because
yeah.
there's a real like class
Yeah.
uh, anger in this book. I mean, one of the reasons that, again, Rosie Rose gets called a victim, and I'm thinking, what is there any recognition of what it's like to not have money, to be poor, that you don't have
Yeah.
options, you have ultimatums. That's what you have.
Oh,
I live,
oh,
I live in a community that is one of the poorest communities in Vermont. And there are people here who are struggling to put boots on their kids and coats on their kids and feed their kids. These are very real. How are you supposed to self-actualize when you're trying to figure out how you're going to keep the house warm, how you're going to fill your grocery cart with food and not get to the counter, the checkout counter, and be declined.
yeah.
So for Rosie to find herself against this background of driving poverty was a challenge for me as a writer, to make that feel authentic and not sort of grand,
Mm,
but to feel real. Um, yeah, and there was like, I just wanted to give the wealthy people in her life a finger, the finger. One of the other, somebody said, "Oh, you can never steal a painting like that and get away with it." And I was like, "That's not even the point."
that's
And
not the point.
they find these paintings. There, Hockney shows up here, and a Rembrandt shows up there. I mean, these paintings absolutely do disappear, and
Yeah.
who cares? For all Rose cares, she could chuck that painting in the sea. It's the idea
Yeah.
of saying, I see the oppression, I see how it works, I see what you did. I mean, there's Hobie, who she goes to as a young woman when she's and admits to him that she's pregnant, mistakenly thinking that he might be a good guy who could genuinely help her. And he sort of gives her some money to go and get an abortion, which is a huge amount of money to her. And to her, that $400 is the divergence of her life.
Yeah.
If she hadn't, if she had had an abortion, her life would have gone one way, and if she hadn't, it went the other way.
Sure.
But she mistakes Hobie's donation to her as some kind of generosity, but it's not. It's basically like trickle down economics. It's like, I have lots and lots of money here, let me sprinkle a little bit down on you. It's utterly meaningless. It
Mm,
won't help you in any meaningful way. It will just help you, get to the next day. But
yeah.
I think that this is kind of where we are as a society. We think that rich people deserve to be unbelievably and insanely rich, and that poor people are somehow poor because they're not savvy enough, or they don't work hard enough, or any of these myths that surround poverty in this country. And the
Yeah.
same myths around wealthy people. Oh, they're rich because they deserve it and they worked hard. Well, actually, no.
Yeah.
Does anybody deserve to be worth $450 billion while not paying their workers properly? No, I mean, this is bullshit. And
Yeah.
so both Rosie and Billy kind of, for me, lie at the heart of that social
Yeah.
argument.
Yeah, and it's I mean, but also, like, so beautifully it's so poetic in the way that you accomplish that because it could be so heavy-handed and it's not. You feel the heartbeat of it all the way through, and you feel the tug of a new awareness even as you're reading it. I mean, I've again been lucky. I was never in a poverty-stricken situation, and so, I felt like I learned a lot. I felt like I learned so much about just thinking through what someone is going through on a day-to-day basis when they're not necessarily born into a home where you do know the heat's always going to be on and you do know you're always going to have food and like it's such an incredible privilege and it should be possible for everyone in a country like this and it's exactly what you're talking about of like the imbalance of someone being worth $450 billion and not paying their workers a living wage. It's just
I
like
think there's We've got, oh, sorry, snow geese flying over. That's what's being yelled
Oh,
outside.
I can't hear it.
Not snow geese, Canada geese flying over because they're
Oh, got it, got it.
right now. So there's great excitement outside. Just I have to give you running commentary of
I love
everything
it.
in the background. Despite having said, could everyone be quiet? Because live. In fact, on my office door, I have a sign and it just says, don't even think about it," right? And but yeah, I'll be in there working and I'll hear somebody come up and stand in front of the door. I can hear the breathing, the child out there going, "Should I? Should I?" And they'll kind of read it, and then I'll hear the footsteps retreat, and they'll go away.
That's amazing.
So, yeah, so it remains for you, Jen, to try and carve out the focus from the
Yeah.
party gig, the like seriously, the like loud calliope that is going on in the background. I think that's, like for Rosie, she never has that. I think her life is very quiet and very focused. Once,
Mm,
of course, once she gets rid of Bennett, which
yeah.
is he's an interesting character. We haven't
That's true. I know. My gosh, we might need a whole other interview for that because we're gonna have to wrap up. But I
sorry,
what I
sorry,
what I
1 second.
yeah.
Molly, I can't come right now, sweetie. Oh, it's a golden eagle. It's
Oh,
not,
maybe you should go.
it's a golden eagle. Well, we live in a house that's very aware of the natural world, and my husband is a wildlife filmmaker. So there we go. But yeah, so we
Wow,
have a golden eagle flying around outside. So yeah.
that's amazing. Um, well, I mean, just to touch on Bennett really quickly before we have to wrap up. He also was a fascinating character to me because I felt like you were just as generous with him in terms of his wholeness as you were with the women. I didn't feel like he was carved out to just be like a villain for a villain's sake. He was not just um, a two-dimensional bad man. He was a very complex, complicated human being who we may not know as much about him as we know about Rosie, but you could feel the texture of his wholeness and his brokenness. I felt in the book, and it made it so much richer to read it with him being painted in that way, and it also made his death so much more meaningful because the lines that he crosses in the end, especially with Billy, are just so dark and so unforgivable that you've made this completely complex living breathing person that we have a chance to care about, and yet he's made these transgressions in the end that sort of finally kind of pin him into that a villainy that it cannot be escaped. You know what I mean? As opposed to it always being that way from the beginning.
I think there's an inevitability. He was a tricky character to write because I did want him to be that whole character. And a friend of mine who's a wonderful reader and a wonderful novelist, a man,
Mm,
he just was furious at the Bennett character. He didn't see any of
mm,
the subtlety that you've seen. And I asked him to go back and reappraise Bennett because in the beginning, Bennett, he's just wanting to be a certain kind of man that society expects him to be, heroic, interesting, successful. Bennett is as much a victim of society's expectations, gender expectations, as Rosie is, and he's
yeah.
just unable to sustain it and becomes more mired in the kind of hagiography, the self-hagiography,
Mm,
and then he can't escape it. He eventually, goes to prison
yeah.
because he just kept telling lies that got bigger and bigger and sunk into those lies in a way that I felt, even though I knew he was destroying Rosie and uncaring of her, he was also a desperate character.
Yeah.
And I think had moments of genuinely wanting to be heroic and brave and fine, and then realizing that basically he was just doing a bunch of drugs in a motel room and thinking it okay to basically give up part of his daughter to a pedophile, which is
Mm,
appalling. But this is how these things happen. People enter this cage of denial about what's actually going on and who they are. And they make these horrendous, I don't even want to call them decisions. They're
Yeah.
what is the word when you just completely surrender? Like you abdication.
Yeah.
So, and I did feel for Bennett how much he wanted to find that high ground and how it just slipped further and further and further away from him. So again, thank you for saying that, Jen.
Yeah, I mean, he's there are just things that you are breathtakingly horrible that happen, but you also can see a whole person and you feel how broken he is and desperate, as you put it, throughout. And it makes you realize, like, that's how villains are created in the real world. It's never just, no one's born a villain, there's a whole complex web of things that have come at that person and things they've experienced and wiring that they have to be seen a certain way in the world or whatever that make up this, and this the ingredients to push them into that kind of villainy or push them into the kind of denial that could make someone abdicate themselves in the way that Bennett does, when the bad things are happening.
Those are the lines that fascinate me as a writer is, why do good people do bad things? Living in a very small community like this, reading the local paper every day,
Mm,
there are people I know who get caught up in really bad things and do really bad
mm,
things. And you're like, yeah, but they worked out, they gave me money for last year's raffle. I
yeah,
think that that's, in a sense, the beauty of living in a small community is that you're forced to see the wholeness of your neighbors and your other people of your community. You can't just say, oh, well, he's a bad egg or, she's a drug addict.
yeah,
The connections are so deeply rooted and oh, you have to see the whole.
yeah,
It can't just
yeah.
go cliche. And
It's that
that,
thing that multiple things can be true at once, right? And we like to
yes,
think that only one thing can be true at once. But there can be many truths that live at the same time, and someone can give to your raffle and care about the community and also be a drug dealer, it's like those three things can all be true at the same time, and we forget that. I say oftentimes, like, the characters that I think are most impacted by that on screen are like when you have someone playing like a serial killer or like a cult leader or something. It's like, in order for someone to be a cult leader, they have to have multiple things be true at once. They have to be charismatic, they have to be appealing, and they have to be speaking enough truth to pull people in. But then they also have to have the capacity to speak incredible lies that they are selling as the truth in order to self-serve whatever it is that they want to self-serve. But all those things are true at once. So that's how you get a whole community of people going, yeah, but he did these good things for me.
I think
It's
it's
like, well,
also
that's true.
I think it's also true that having, bumped into a couple of pathological lies, that those lies actually feel like those lies feel like truth.
Mm,
That those people have lost any sense of navigating between fact and fiction, and they say something, and it's so sort of soggy and flimsy that it could be one thing or it could be the other. I think that they are completely lost in what is truth or what is fiction
yeah.
in their own headspace. It's in a sense they're no longer lying. They're just speaking some kind of weird
Wow.
echo chamber.
Yeah.
Um,
I
so
honestly could talk to you for days. I not even just all day or many hours, but I wish we could do this like weekly. I do have to wrap up, but do you have anything coming out? Are you working on something? Should we be on the lookout for something new?
I am actually working on another book. I don't know. It's sort of like I guess it has another feminist element to it, but it's really about this talking about lies and liars.
Mm,
It's about the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of the world around us, but
mm,
how those stories are become problematic, because maybe they're not true, and we make decisions based on those stories. But that might, if it's not a true story, you're only going to make bad decisions. So yeah, and it's nothing to do with necessarily being fantasists or pathological liars. I think we all kind of create this version of the world.
Yeah, it's to tell it the stories we tell ourselves to get through the
Yeah.
day or make sense of our lives or yeah.
So, but
Wow, I'm
it's
excited.
been it's been tricky, school, summer, to find the time, but I think
Yeah.
that would be a good time. So hopefully at the end of next year, that will be out. And it's kind of a ghost. It's got a creepy ghost story element to it.
Ooh.
Excited
Well,
about
if you ever want an early reader.
I will have you in mind. I will have you in mind because you have proved what a discerning reader that you are by being so,
Oh,
like, just on the money. As a writer, I have to say, when people come and they've absolutely seen the truth of your book and what you were trying to achieve, when someone gets it, it's just, it's really powerful and it means so much. So thank you, Jen.
oh, I'm so happy. I mean, I don't know. I'm just reading, and so all I know is the way I perceive it. So also know that it was what was intended also feels good too. It's like, oh, good, I got it. I got what she wanted. So, well, thank you so much, Melanie. I hope we get to do this again sometime. And yeah, we're huge fans. So if there's any way that I can, or if the company can support you, or A3C Reads can support you, we are fans for life.
Oh, that's so fantastic. Thank you, Jen. And sorry for the delay and the life noise in the background.
No worries. It was a great sound design.
Great. Thank you. Thanks so
All
much, Jen.
right. Have a great day. Take care.